juice like a snow cone. Ice in my veins and a cold flow. I'm getting cash overseas by the boatload. You wanna ride my wave? That's a no-go. Senoritas going loco. Make it bounce like a pogo. All my haters see rojo. They big mad cause they coming up short like Frodo. Activate the beast mode. I keep it hot, give your brain a heat stroke. You ain't a big shot, you some basic B-roll. The world is mine, like my name's Pacino. Hey, it's Nico, I guess I'm back. Catch me in the fast lane on the right track. And my shorty is a 10 like a dime bag. Got me feeling like a milli, check the price tag. Got the party jumping like crisscross. Got the gold chain and the wristwatch. Pull up on the scene like a big shot. EDM and hip-hop, ain't no time for pit stops. Got the party jumping like crisscross. Got the gold chain and the wristwatch. Pull up on the scene like a big shot. EDM and hip-hop, is my style.
Values, we can put them inside a list, and it allows us to organize Mad Libs game, hopefully one that's a little bit funnier than mine, but that's the basics of creating a Mad Libs game in Python. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you guys about working with lists in Python. A lot of times when you're programming in Python, you're going to be dealing with large amounts of data. And when you're dealing with large amounts of data, you want to make sure that you can manage it and organize it properly. And a list is essentially just a structure that we can use inside of Python to store lists of information. So we can take a bunch of different data values, we can put them inside a list, and it allows us to organize them and keep track of them a lot easier. So generally you would create a Python list and you would put a bunch of related values inside of that list, and then you can use it throughout your program. So I'm going to show you guys just the basics of using lists. We're going to look at some of the common use cases and really just get you up to speed with what lists are and why they're useful. So over here in my program, I'm actually going to create a list, and we create a list a lot like we create a Python, just like a normal Python variable. So the first thing we want to do when we're making a list is give it a name. So we want to give it a descriptive name, something that's going to basically describe what's inside the list. In my case, for this example, let's make a list of like friends. So we could say like, here's a list of all my friends. So I can say friends, and I'm going to set this equal to the list of values that represent my friends. And when we want to create a list, we can use these open and closed square brackets. So whenever you use these open and closed square brackets, Python basically knows, okay, they want to store a bunch of values inside of this list. So why don't we go ahead and start adding some values. So we can say like my friends are like Kevin, Karen, and let's say Jim. So here I have 3 values inside of my friends array. So when we're creating a normal variable in Python, generally we just give it one value, right? So I would create a variable, I would give it one value, maybe a string or a number or a Boolean. But when we make lists, we're able to store multiple values inside of the same like little item, inside of the same object, right? And then what I can do is I can access these individual items inside of my program. So inside of this friends list, we're basically storing all of these different values, and that can be really useful. So now that we've stored some values, let's talk about what you can put inside of a list. So you can really put any piece of information in Python. We could put things like strings, numbers, or Booleans. So if I wanted, instead of just putting strings here, I could change like one of these to a number, and I could change one of these to a Boolean, and it wouldn't matter. Python's going to be fine with that. But let's change these back to strings just for the sake of the example. So now that we've created to a Boolean Python, we could put things like strings, numbers, or Booleans. So if I wanted, instead of just putting strings here, I could change like one of these to a number, and I could change one of these to a Boolean, and it wouldn't matter. Python's going to be fine with that. But let's change these back to strings just for the sake of the example. So now that we've created our list, how can we access individual elements inside of this list? It's a good question. I'm going to go ahead and print something out to the screen. The first thing we can do is we can just print out the actual list. So I can just say print friends, And then when I run this program, if we look down here in the console, you can see it's just printing out the actual list of friends, right? But let's say that I wanted to print out a specific element inside of this list. Well, I can actually refer to elements by their index. So each one of the elements inside of this list has a particular index. And the indexes actually start at 0. So we would say that this first element in the list, Kevin, has an index of 0. We would say that this other element, Karen, has an index of 1. And this third element, Jim, would have an index of 2. So even though Jim is technically the third element inside of the list, it has an index of 2. And that's because we start indexing at index position 1. And so that's just kind of how lists work, and that's how list indexes work. So if I wanted to access a specific element inside of my friends list, I can just refer to it by its index. So over here, after we type out friends, I'm just going to type an open and closed square bracket. And inside of this open and closed square bracket, I want to put the index of the element inside the list that I want to access. So if I wanted to access this guy right here, this element, I can just put a 0. So I can say friends 0. And now when I run my program, it's just going to print out that value. It's just going to print out Kevin. If I wanted to access this Jim value over here, I can put a 2. And that will give us that Jim value. You can see right there. So we can access elements based off of their index. We can also access elements based off of their index from the back of the list. So for example, if I said -1 inside of here, this is going to give me access to this value right here for Jim. And you can see that's what it does. So when we use negatives, it starts indexing from the back of the list. So if I said -2, this is going to give us Karen. And so you can use the negatives to access items at the back of the list. Just keep in mind though, and this is kind of interesting, we would say this first element here is index position 0, right? But we would say the first element at the back of the list is index position -1. So just keep that in mind. So there's actually other ways that we can access like just portions of this list. So for example, let's say I just wanted to select the last 2 elements in this list and I didn't want to select the first one. Well, in here, I can just say 1 with a colon, and this will grab the element at index position 1 and all of the elements after that. So now we should just grab Jim and Karen, or Karen and Jim in that order. I could also specify a range. So actually, let me add in a couple other elements just so that we can illustrate this better. So I'll add in 2 more names. So if I wanted to, I could select like the element at index position 1 up to the element at index position 3. So it's going to grab this one. So that's 1, 2, and it's actually not going to grab the third one. So it's going to grab all the elements up to, but not including 3. So it'll grab Karen and Jim. So let's go ahead and run this, and you can see it grabs Karen and Jim. So you can either 1, 2, and it's actually not going to grab the third one. So it's going to grab all the elements up to, but not including 3. So it'll grab Karen and Jim. So let's go ahead and run this, and you can see it grabs Karen and Jim. So you can either just put like 1 with a colon after it, and then it'll grab that index position and everything after it, or you can specify like a range that you want to grab from. So that's how we can access elements inside of this list, but we can also modify elements. So for example, I could come down here. Let's say I want to modify this value right here, Karen. Well, all I have to do is just access that element. So I could say friends and Karen is at index position 1, and I could change this to whatever I want. So I could say friends index position 1 is equal to Mike. And now when we print out friends index position 1, that value is going to be updated. So it's just going to say Mike instead of saying Karen. So it can be really useful to modify values inside of arrays. So it can be really useful to modify values inside of Python lists. So those are kind of the basics of working with lists in Python. And actually in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you guys even more ways that we can use these lists. We're going to learn how to like add elements to a list, delete elements from a list, copy lists, and a bunch of cool stuff with these lists. But for now, this has just been sort of like the basics of working with lists. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you guys about using functions with lists in Python. In Python, a list is one of the most important structures where we can store our information. A list basically allows you to take a bunch of different values and organize them and store them inside of their own little list structure. So down here in my program, you can see I have two lists. I have a list of lucky numbers, and this is just a bunch of different numbers. And then I have a list of friends. So this could be like a list of somebody's friends, and it's basically just a bunch of strings with names in them. So these two lists are storing a bunch of different values. And what makes lists awesome is not only can I store like this many values, I mean, I could store hundreds or thousands or millions of values. And when you're working with a lot of data and a lot of information in Python, these lists lists are invaluable. So because lists are so important, there's actually a bunch of different functions that we can use with lists. And those functions allow us to do things like modify the lists and get information about the lists. So in this tutorial, I just want to show you a bunch of those functions. We're going to talk about some of the most common and most popular functions that you would use on lists to make them more powerful and make them more easy to use. So the first thing we can do is obviously just print out a list. So down here, I'm printing out this friends list. And when I run my program, you see down here, we're just printing out all the elements in the list. So it's always good to be able to print out all the elements inside of a list. But there's a lot of other functions that we